have been 4 objections that have been raised by critics over the years. First, they challenge whether or not Belshazzar even existed. That would then, attack chapters 7 and 8 because those chapters are attached to a ruling year of his. Next, him being called king, and for that matter, he would be then deemed the last king of Babylon. Next is his feast for 1,000 lords, as this is a number that is simply way too high to be possibly even done. And then the repeated descriptions of Nebuchadnezzar being called his father, or him being called the son of Nebuchadnezzar. What's always important to remember in this is that adamant critics are simply fishing for an excuse to dismiss the whole book as altogether. So let's quickly chop down each one of these one by one. Attacking Belshazzar's existence is really an old objection that was raised in the 19th century by German Bible critic Ferdinand Hitzig, who said, even supposing that the king of the Medes in question, i.e. Darius, Daniel 5:31, had existed, the objection is the name under which he is referenced in Daniel. Each of the two were standardized in Nabonidus equaling Belshazzar, which is repeated in Cyaxares equaling Darius, to Daniel's discredit. What he is saying is that everyone knew that Nabonidus was the last king, but that the author of Daniel made a huge historical error saying that the last king was Belshazzar. His argument was based on that no available records at that time ever even mentioned Belshazzar. So the conclusion was that he never existed, and thus the book of Daniel is an error and must have been written much later because no contemporary person would have made such a terrible mistake. So this would have been an argument from silence, but one that was probably pretty justifiable at that point in history. Because, to much of Hitzig's chagrin, it only took a few years later, with the advent of Near East archaeology, that Belshazzar burst forth onto the scene. The Nabonidus cylinder has Nabonidus calling Belshazzar his firstborn son. Alright, so he actually existed and the Bible got one right. It's not a big deal. It's not like it proves that the book was written early. Actually, it does. Because the critic's position is that some anonymous Jew wrote this book nearly 400 years after the events in 539 BC. And as Hitzig correctly pointed out, none of the ancient Greek historians ever mentioned him. So here's the question, critics. How is it possible for your anonymous 2nd century author to get this right when nobody else had ever mentioned him before? He simply couldn't have copied it off of somebody else's work. So it's really not possible, is it? And it means that only an eyewitness account coming from the 6th century makes sense. So number 1 is not used anymore for obvious reasons. Number 2 is still used quite a bit, but I don't understand why, because of 3 recorded accounts. First is the Persian verse account of Nabonidus in the British Museum. It says, putting the camp under the rule of his oldest son, the firstborn, the army of the empire he placed under his command. His hands were now free. He entrusted the authority of the royal throne to him. And as we just saw in the Nabonidus Chronicle, Belshazzar is his firstborn son. Next, from the Yale Babylonian collection, is the interpretation of Nabonidus' dream. Here, Nabonidus calls Belshazzar the crown prince. Now yes, this isn't him calling him the king, but as we saw, Nabonidus did give him full authority over the kingdom. And the final account coming from King Cyrus himself, saying on the famous Cyrus cylinder that a coward was put in charge as the king of this country. It may not say Belshazzar, but there is no doubt that it's referring to him. So number 2 should stop being used. Number 3 is really easy to refute as well. First, in Esther 1, it talks about a 180-day feast that King Xerxes threw for all his princes and servants in the provinces. And an Assyrian stela of Ashurnasirpal described him throwing a 10-day feast for nearly 70,000 people. So all that leaves us with are the verses that repeatedly say that Nebuchadnezzar is Belshazzar's father, or saying that Belshazzar is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Because in verse 2, it explicitly says his father Nebuchadnezzar. That is then repeated in verses 11, 13, 18, and 22. But as we saw, Belshazzar is clearly called or is the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. The simple answer is that both Aramaic and Hebrew do not have words for grandson or grandfather. They simply have a word that implies a descendant. And this is easily confirmed in other scripture. Elijah is called Elisha's father, but 1 Kings 19:16 quite clearly says that Elisha is the son of Shaphat. Jesus is called the son of David, and the Jews refer to Abraham as their father in the New Testament, which are obviously both just referring to their lineage, and the Assyrians did the same, as Shalmaneser called King Jehu a son of Omri. And as you can see, there are 3 kings and 30 years between Omri and Jehu. But the bigger catch to this is that Jehu wasn't even a descendant of Omri. He actually starts the 4th ruling dynasty of the northern kingdom of Israel. So him being called a son of someone had a wide variety of meaning in the ancient world. See how bad these arguments really are? It's just the critics trying to grasp straws to find one little error in the book to try to throw the baby out with the bathwater with Daniel and really the Bible as a whole. Reminder, hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, leave a comment, and don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. But in the meantime, stay salty.